What if I told you that every burning desire a man feels, every pulse of passion, every craving for intimacy is not just biological, but a keyhole into something far deeper, far darker than we dare admit? You see, behind that seductive pull lies a hidden story, not just of pleasure, but of shame, power, and the ancient hunger for validation. We just dress it up in lust and call it natural. But here's the twist. What if that desire is not yours at all, but a mask for the emptiness you inherited and never questioned? Don't worry, this isn't a lecture on morality. We'll laugh, maybe squirm, but you'll see yourself in the mirror before this ends. And trust me, once you uncover the truth buried inside your own longing, you won't be able to look at yourself or your relationships the same way again. Stay with me, because what comes next will shake the ground beneath everything you thought you understood about being a man. Sexual desire, while often celebrated as a natural and exhilarating part of human experience, carries with it layers of meaning that reach far beyond the physical. Beneath the surface of that powerful urge lies a maze of psychological imprints, many of which trace back to our earliest experiences. Some remembered, others buried so deeply they shape us from the shadows. For many men, what feels like desire is actually a manifestation of unresolved emotional wounds, often inherited through childhood conditioning, unspoken traumas, and unmet emotional needs that have been displaced into the realm of sexuality. In the formative years, a child absorbs the emotional climate of his environment like a sponge. A boy growing up with emotionally unavailable parents, particularly a distant or inconsistent father, or an overbearing or emotionally volatile mother, may unconsciously develop skewed associations with love, connection, and validation. If a boy learns, whether directly or indirectly, that his emotional expressions are invalid, weak, or shameful, he may begin to suppress them altogether. These repressed emotions don't simply vanish, they reroute, and often they find their outlet in physical desire. Imagine a boy who grows up craving warmth, attention, and emotional affirmation, yet consistently receives coldness, criticism, or indifference. He might eventually stumble upon sexual pleasure through media, personal experience, or cultural messaging, and find that this one sensation gives him a fleeting taste of what he has longed for all along. Intimacy, attention, a sense of being wanted. Over time, this association deepens. Pleasure becomes a proxy for affection, lust becomes a surrogate for love, and sexual desire becomes a veil draped over emotional hunger. Society compounds this dynamic by shaping the masculine identity around performance, control, and dominance. Men are taught, explicitly or subtly, that expressing vulnerability is weakness, that talking about pain is unmanly, and that worth is measured by power, conquest, and external success. Sexuality, in this framework, becomes a playground for proving masculinity, rather than exploring genuine connection. The more disconnected a man becomes from his emotional self, the more likely he is to seek validation through physical encounters, not realizing that what he truly craves is something no partner's body can offer. In this pursuit, many men experience a paradox. They achieve the act, the climax, the brief satisfaction, but often feel emptier afterward. That void, far from being a sign of dysfunction, is a whisper from the unconscious. This is not what you really needed. That ache you feel isn't hunger for sex, it's grief over being unseen. It's anger over being dismissed. It's the child inside you, still waiting for someone to say, "You're enough as you are." The media, meanwhile, bombards the psyche with images of perfection, eroticism, and hypermasculinity. This constant stream of stimuli reinforces the belief that sexual prowess is the gateway to fulfillment. But what gets buried beneath these glamorous illusions is the truth that unresolved emotional pain doesn't vanish through repeated gratification. It festers, it shapes behaviors, it drives compulsions. And so the cycle continues. The more a man feels unseen, the more he seeks affirmation. The more he seeks through sex, the less fulfilled he feels. The less fulfilled he feels, the more ashamed he becomes. And shame, left unexamined, fuels yet another round of compulsive pursuit. For some, these patterns manifest in addiction, pornography, casual encounters, fantasies that spiral into obsession, not because the desire itself is wrong, but because the soul beneath it is aching to be acknowledged. This is where childhood conditioning becomes especially powerful. If a boy is shamed for his natural curiosity or punished for expressing his emotions, he learns that safety lies in secrecy and suppression. The adult version of him continues these patterns, often unconsciously, believing that hiding and performing are the only ways to survive emotionally. Even in committed relationships, these unresolved patterns can emerge subtly. A man might find himself disconnected from his partner emotionally, but highly dependent on physical intimacy to feel close. He might struggle to express his fears or vulnerabilities, but crave sexual connection as a stand-in for words he never learned to speak. He might feel threatened when intimacy becomes emotionally deep rather than physically intense, because emotional depth requires confronting the very wounds he spent a lifetime avoiding. All of this points to a profound truth. Sexual desire is not merely about biology. It is deeply psychological. It reflects how a man sees himself, how he was taught to love and be loved, and how he handles his own emotional landscape. For those who take the time to examine it honestly, desire becomes a portal to healing, not just pleasure. But the journey requires courage, a willingness to sit with discomfort, to trace the patterns back to their origin, to question the stories he inherited from parents, culture, and past experiences. This inner work is not about demonizing sexuality, it's about liberating it from the chains of unconscious pain. It's about recognizing that what we often label as desire is frequently a coded message from the inner child, still yearning for a touch that says, "You are safe now." That message, once heard and embraced, begins to dissolve the illusion that sex alone can fill the void. The real task is not to conquer desire, but to decode it, to turn inward and ask, what am I really longing for underneath this feeling? When did I first learn to replace love with performance? And who told me that my worth was something I had to earn rather than something I already carried? The pursuit of pleasure is often portrayed as a sign of freedom, confidence, and success. We chase it in countless forms, through sex, food, entertainment, wealth, and digital validation. It's packaged as self-care, as ambition, even as enlightenment. But behind this shiny surface lies a reality many avoid confronting, that the constant hunger for stimulation is often not about enjoyment at all, but rather a coping mechanism to avoid the silence that exposes our emptiness. Beneath the craving for highs, beneath the compulsive reaching for the next dopamine hit, there is often a whisper of insecurity that we don't know how to face directly. From a young age, we are conditioned to equate feeling good with being okay. If something makes us laugh, excites us, turns us on, or gives us a moment of thrill, we assume we must be on the right path. But no one teaches us how to sit in discomfort, how to understand the void that forms in moments of stillness. So we run. We run toward anything that promises sensation, because sensation feels alive, even when it's just noise. And in that noise, we find temporary relief from the ache of not knowing who we are without it. This pattern becomes so normalized that it's invisible. A man might wake up each day and instinctively scroll through his phone, drown in music, indulge in fantasies, or obsess over status, all without realizing he's avoiding something far deeper. He thinks he's seeking happiness, but what he's actually doing is building walls to keep his own insecurities out of sight. The pleasure isn't the problem, it's the dependency on it to escape pain that creates the trap. The danger is that this pattern works, at least for a while. The rush of pleasure does create a sense of aliveness, but it's fleeting, and like any drug, it demands more the next time. The highs become shorter, the come-downs heavier, and the person behind the chase begins to feel hollow. They may not even know why they feel disconnected, lost, or anxious, because the pursuit itself has become so automatic that they've lost sight of what they were originally trying to soothe. What's often hidden underneath this cycle is a core fear that we're not enough without our distractions, That if the noise stopped, we'd be exposed. That if we stopped chasing pleasure, we might have to sit with memories we've buried, wounds we've ignored, or doubts we've suppressed. And so, pleasure becomes a mask, a beautiful, glittering disguise worn over fear, shame, and self-doubt. It becomes easier to seek attention than to seek healing, easier to chase desire than to build self-respect, easier to be entertained than to be self-aware. This is not just a modern problem, though technology has amplified it. For centuries, philosophers and mystics have warned about the illusions of pleasure when disconnected from meaning. When pleasure is used as a way to celebrate life, it enriches us. But when it's used to avoid life, it depletes us. Many men, especially those raised in environments that discouraged emotional expression, learn to use pleasure as their only reliable source of comfort. They may have never been taught how to grieve, how to express fear, or how to feel vulnerable without shame. So they seek out the rush of sex, achievement, or entertainment, not out of greed, but out of emotional survival. Yet the body and soul are not fooled. Over time, even the most intoxicating pleasures lose their taste. The momentary satisfaction fades faster, and the man is left staring into a mirror he's tried to avoid. The questions begin to echo louder. Why do I still feel unfulfilled? Why am I restless even after getting what I thought I wanted? Why does nothing feel enough? This is where the cycle can either deepen or break. Some double down, chasing harder, numbing more aggressively. Others begin to wake up, slowly recognizing that the pursuit itself is a clue, not to shame, but to self-discovery. They begin to notice the patterns, the moments of sadness after pleasure, the hollow feeling that follows the high. They start to realize that what they've been running from is not life's harshness, but their own unaddressed pain. To face that pain requires courage. It demands sitting in silence, not to punish oneself, but to finally listen, to feel the weight of past rejections, old wounds, and the fear of being insignificant. It's in those quiet moments that a man can begin to reconnect with himself, not as a performer or a consumer, but as a human being. The pleasure he once chased begins to transform. It no longer needs to be constant or extreme. It becomes deeper, more meaningful, rooted in presence rather than escape. This transformation doesn't mean the end of desire, but the end of dependency. It means being able to enjoy pleasure without being enslaved by it. It means recognizing that the inner emptiness was never a flaw, but a call for connection, with self, with purpose, with truth. The pursuit of pleasure, when unconscious, leads to exhaustion. But when illuminated, it becomes a mirror, reflecting back the parts of us that are finally ready to be seen. Lust is often misunderstood as a purely biological urge, something primal and instinctual, disconnected from the complex workings of the human psyche. Yet, beneath its surface lies a labyrinth of deeper motivations, emotions, and unmet needs that rarely get acknowledged. Power, control, and validation are among the most potent of these hidden forces. They disguise themselves as desire, masking a deeper psychological hunger for significance, security, and identity. What appears to be a sexual impulse can often be a silent cry for worth or a subconscious strategy to reassert one's importance in a world that constantly challenges it. For many men, the experience of lust can be deeply intertwined with power, not necessarily the power to harm or dominate, but the power to feel alive, to feel capable, to feel in control. In moments of desire, particularly those involving pursuit or conquest, there is often a sense of regaining agency in a life that may otherwise feel unpredictable or disempowering. The body becomes a battlefield for reclaiming authority, not just over another person, but over one's own sense of helplessness. In this way, sexual encounters are sometimes less about connection and more about asserting a kind of emotional dominance that was lost elsewhere in life. This connection to power often begins in environments where control was taken away early. If a child grows up feeling unseen, ignored, or disrespected, he may begin to internalize the idea that power is something external, something to be taken rather than something that is inherent. Later, in adult life, when lust arises, it can carry with it a shadowy echo of these childhood experiences. The sexual act becomes a stage where forgotten wounds play out, where the man unconsciously attempts to rewrite the past by proving, even for a fleeting moment, that he is desired, needed, and in command. Control is another layer that frequently hides beneath lust. While it may seem that lust is a surrender to instinct, in many cases it's a carefully constructed performance. In a world that often feels chaotic, filled with emotional vulnerability and uncertainty, the structure of seduction offers a kind of order. The roles are known, the goals are clear. Within the framework of lust, especially when acted out through manipulation or idealization, a person can feel momentarily in charge. This control might be over another's attention, body, or emotions, but more than anything, it's about controlling one's own inner chaos. Lust becomes a ritual of control, a way to avoid the deeper fears of emotional exposure or personal inadequacy. Validation might be the most seductive of all the hidden motivations under lust. It's not just about being wanted, it's about being chosen, approved of, admired. It's about having one's worth confirmed by another's desire. In this sense, lust becomes less about physical sensation and more about emotional confirmation. The glance, the touch, the message, the yes, all of it feeds a hungry ego that may have been starved for affirmation in earlier years. When a man believes his value is tied to being desired, sexual validation becomes his lifeline. Each encounter, each flirtation, each conquest adds another fragile layer to a shaky self-image. But this kind of validation is temporary and fragile. It relies on external responses, and it demands constant repetition. The more one relies on lust for validation, the more compulsive the behavior becomes. The chase never ends, because the internal void it tries to fill is never satisfied. And each time the high wears off, the person is left more uncertain than before, wondering why it never feels like enough. This creates a dangerous loop, where desire is mistaken for affirmation and connection is confused with performance. This cycle is particularly reinforced by cultural messaging that ties masculinity to sexual success. Men are often conditioned to equate their manhood with their ability to attract, seduce, and perform. Emotional depth, vulnerability, and self-reflection are often discouraged or dismissed. In such an environment, it's no surprise that lust becomes a channel through which deeper needs are expressed in disguised form. If a man cannot say, "I feel invisible," he may instead seek to be desired. If he cannot admit, "I feel powerless," he may seek control through physical dominance. If he cannot voice, "I need to feel worthy," he may chase validation through romantic or sexual conquest. This doesn't make lust wrong or shameful, it makes it complicated. The challenge is not in experiencing desire, but in understanding it. When a man begins to look beneath the surface of his lust, he may discover it is speaking to much older stories. Stories of not being enough, stories of being overlooked, stories of fear, of failure, of needing to matter. These stories don't disappear through sex. They persist, quietly shaping behaviors until they are confronted. This deeper exploration requires honesty, patience, and a willingness to let go of the masks that society often rewards. It demands that a man ask himself not just what he wants, but why he wants it. What is he truly seeking in the moment of lust? Is it connection, or is it control? Is it love, or is it reassurance that he is still desirable? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary. Because only when the real motivations are brought to light can lust become something more conscious, more integrated, something that reflects wholeness rather than fragmentation. To understand the dark truth of desire is to take a journey inward, into the depths of the human psyche, where shadows are not just flaws to be corrected, but reflections of the self we have not yet faced. Desire, in all its forms, is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. It fuels ambition, creates connection, and brings meaning, but it also distorts reality when left unchecked. When desire operates in the dark, unquestioned, unexamined, it becomes a master rather than a servant, quietly dictating choices, relationships, and even identity. The man who seeks authentic self-mastery must be willing to look beyond the surface of what he wants and ask what drives his wanting. Desire often presents itself as clarity, an intense pull towards someone, something, or some experience that promises fulfillment. But behind this pull lies a complex web of past experiences, traumas, insecurities, and unmet needs. Most people are taught to chase what they want without ever being taught to investigate why they want it. A man might pursue wealth, recognition, or romantic partners, believing that these things will complete him, validate him, or finally silence the inner critic that whispers he's not enough. But when the thing is acquired, the satisfaction is short-lived. The void returns, the hunger remains, and the cycle repeats. This repetition is not random, it is a sign. It signals that the object of desire is not the true source of longing. The real craving lies beneath the surface, in a space that can't be filled by external accomplishments or pleasures. The dark truth of desire is that it is often a disguise. It wears the face of passion but carries the weight of pain. It speaks in the language of pursuit but hides the need for healing. And as long as a man avoids this truth, he will continue to live in a state of reaction rather than creation. To step into self-mastery is to become a conscious participant in one's own evolution. It means recognizing when desire is being used as an escape from discomfort rather than a compass toward growth. It means acknowledging that many of our cravings are echoes of old wounds. The desire to be loved may mask a fear of abandonment. The desire to win may hide a terror of insignificance. The desire to possess may be a response to childhood environments where safety and consistency were missing. These realizations can be uncomfortable, even painful, but they are necessary. Because self-mastery does not come from suppressing desire, it comes from understanding it. It comes from asking again and again, what am I really after? What feeling am I trying to avoid? What part of myself have I disowned that this desire is trying to compensate for? These are not questions that lead to quick answers. They are the kind of questions that invite a deeper dialogue with the self, a willingness to sit in uncertainty, and the courage to confront parts of the psyche that have long been exiled. The man who embarks on this path begins to experience a shift. He stops chasing things to feel powerful and begins cultivating inner strength. He no longer seeks love to feel worthy, but brings his worth into his relationships. He becomes less reactive to the highs and lows of life because he is no longer controlled by unconscious longing. His desires don't disappear, they become integrated. They no longer possess him. They become expressions of his truth, not attempts to cover up his pain. This kind of inner clarity is rare in a world that rewards performance over presence, consumption over contemplation. It requires discipline to pause before acting on every impulse. It requires honesty to admit when the thing we want is not for growth, but for ego. And it requires humility to understand that desire itself is not wrong, it is simply a messenger. Its job is to alert us to our inner landscape. Our job is to listen with discernment. Authentic self-mastery is not about perfection. It's about integration. It's about welcoming the parts of ourselves we've tried to avoid. The insecure part, the angry part, the lonely part. When these aspects are acknowledged, they stop hijacking our desire. They stop turning relationships into negotiations, careers into compensations, and pleasure into addiction. Instead, they become part of a larger, more whole self that no longer needs to act out its wounds in the pursuit of satisfaction. Desire, when seen in this light, becomes sacred. It becomes a map, pointing not toward external acquisition, but internal awareness. It becomes a teacher, showing us where we're still bound, where we've given away our power, and where we have yet to grow. And in that understanding, freedom is born. Not the freedom to indulge in every craving, but the freedom to choose what truly aligns with our highest self. This is what separates self-mastery from self-control. Self-control resists temptation. Self-mastery understands its roots. Self-control pushes away. Self-mastery invites inquiry. One is fueled by willpower, the other by wisdom, and that wisdom comes only from facing the darker truths, the uncomfortable, often hidden motivations that shape how we love, how we live, and how we define ourselves.